Victor Sanders tapped his fingers against his desk, staring at the latest customer complaints. One, in particular, caught his attention. A woman had been rudely denied assistance by security at one of his stores. Normally, complaints were handled by management, but something about this one made his gut tighten. Since buying the retail chain 8 years ago, he'd worked hard to make it a place where everyone felt welcome. Lately, though, reports of poor customer service and aggressive security had been ink. Victor had worked his way up from nothing, turning failing businesses into thriving ones. He wasn't the kind of CEO who sat back and let things slide. If something was wrong, he needed to see it for himself. There were 9 stores under his ownership, and while he visited them occasionally, most employees had never met him in person. The stores were spread across different cities, and with so many managers in place, it was easy for things to slip through the cracks. That's why he decided to go undercover. A week later, Victor walked into the store in question, dressed in a faded hoodie and jeans. He had grown out his beard and wore glasses he didn't need. There was no way anyone would recognize him as the CEO. As far as they knew, he was just another customer. The first thing he noticed was the atmosphere. The store was clean, but there was tension in the air. Employees looked tired, moving quickly, avoiding eye contact with a man standing near the entrance security. Victor took his time browsing, watching everything. The employees weren't the problem, they were working hard. It was the security guard, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a shaved head, who stood out. He wasn't just watching for theft. He was controlling the space like he owned it, making people uncomfortable. After a while, Victor moved toward the checkout, but something caught his eye: a heavily pregnant woman struggling to carry a basket full of groceries. She looked exhausted, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. She approached the entrance, hesitating as she tried to balance her basket and reach for her purse. The security guard stepped forward. "You can't stand here," he said, his voice sharp. The woman blinked, caught off guard. "I just need a second." "Not my problem," he interrupted. Then, without warning, he pushed her aside. It wasn't a violent shove, but enough to make her stumble. She gasped, grabbing onto the cart of a nearby customer to steady herself. Victor felt his blood boil. People around them froze, unsure of what to do. The woman looked humiliated, her face turning red. Victor clenched his fists, forcing himself to stay calm. He wasn't ready to reveal himself, not yet. He needed to see how this place really operated before stepping in. The woman took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "You didn't have to do that," she said, her voice shaking. The guard scoffed. "Maybe don't block the entrance next time." Then, as if nothing had happened, he turned away. Victor's jaw tightened. He had seen enough. He followed the woman as she made her way to the checkout. She looked like she wanted to disappear, but he wasn't about to let this go. "Are you okay?" he asked. She glanced at him, surprised. After a moment, she nodded. "Yeah, just embarrassed." "That guy had no right to do that," Victor said. She let out a bitter laugh. "I know, but what can I do? Report him? Doubt anyone would care." Victor's stomach twisted. Was this what people thought of his stores, that they wouldn't be heard? He needed to do more than just fire one bad security guard. He needed to fix the culture that allowed this behavior in the first place. But first, he had work to do. Victor stayed in the store for the next few hours, blending in, watching. The security guard, whose name tag read Dawson, carried himself like an enforcer rather than someone meant to keep the store safe. He wasn't just aggressive with customers. Employees flinched when he walked by. Near the back of the store, a young cashier named Lewis was stocking shelves, moving quickly but carefully. Dawson walked past him and deliberately knocked a bottle off the shelf. It shattered against the floor. Lewis stiffened, but immediately bent down to clean it up. Dawson crossed his arms, watching. "Faster, customers don't want to see you crawling around." Louis nodded, keeping his head down. Victor stepped closer, pretending to browse. A shift manager, a woman in a navy blue shirt, hurried over. "Louis, what happened?" Before Louis could answer, Dawson spoke. "Kid's clumsy, he broke it." Louis's shoulders tensed. "I didn't." The manager held up a hand. "Not now, just clean it up." Victor studied her. She wasn't cruel, but she looked exhausted. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't just one person. He continued his observation, moving between aisles. Employees weren't slacking off, but they were operating under tension. There was no casual conversation, no teamwork, just people doing their jobs quickly and cautiously. Later, at the registers, an elderly man struggled to get his card to work. The cashier, a woman with dark curls pulled into a bun, was patient, but Dawson stepped in. "You holding up the line." The man flushed. "I just need a second." Dawson exhaled loudly. "You don't have enough, do you?" The woman behind the register frowned. "I can try again." Victor had seen enough. Dawson's behavior wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. He left the store and sat in his car, thinking. The problem wasn't just Dawson. It was the store's management allowing this environment to exist. Employees were afraid to speak up, and customers were being mistreated. Victor pulled out his phone and called his head of security, Mark. "Need a favor," Victor said. "Get me everything on the security team at the downtown location, especially Dawson." Mark didn't ask questions. "Give me an hour." While waiting, Victor drove to a nearby cafe and pulled out a notebook, making a list of everything he had seen. Employees afraid to speak. A manager, too, worn down to intervene. A security guard acting like an enforcer instead of protection. An hour later, Mark called back. "Dawson's been with the company for 3 years. No official complaints, but there are multiple incidents logged as resolved internally. Looks like he had issues at the previous store before transferring to this one." Victor's grip on the pen tightened. Who approved the transfer? Regional manager, same guy overseeing this location. Victor leaned back in his chair. That explains a lot. Mark hesitated. "Do you need me to step in?" "Not yet," Victor closed his notebook. "I will handle it." The next morning, he walked into the store, no disguise this time. Employees glanced up, their expressions shifting from confusion to unease. The store manager, Tom, a short man with graying hair, approached quickly. "Mr. Sanders, we weren't expecting you." Victor didn't waste time. "Where's Dawson?" Tom hesitated. "Is there a problem?" Victor didn't answer. He turned toward the front of the store. Dawson was standing near the entrance, arms crossed. He saw Victor and straightened, but there wasn't recognition in his eyes yet. Victor walked up. "We need to talk." Dawson gave a slow nod. "Sure, what's this about?" Victor didn't respond. He led Dawson to the back office. Tom followed nervously. Inside, Victor shut the door. "You pushed a pregnant woman yesterday," Victor said. Dawson's expression barely changed. "She was in the way." Victor exhaled slowly. "You also humiliated an elderly customer at checkout and knocked a bottle off the shelf to blame an employee." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't aware of." Victor held up a hand, stopping him. Dawson's gaze hardened. "I do my job, I keep order." "No," Victor said. "You intimidate, you harass. You make this store a miserable place for employees and customers." Dawson's jaw tightened. "That's not." "I own this company," Victor interrupted, "and as of this moment you're fired." Dawson's mouth opened, then closed. He looked to Tom, who avoided eye contact. Victor didn't wait for a response. "Tom, call security and have him escorted out." Tom nodded quickly and stepped out. Dawson stared at Victor for a long moment before scoffing. "You're making a mistake." "No," Victor said. "The mistake was letting you work here in the first place." Dawson left without another word. Victor turned to Tom. "We need to talk about how this was allowed to happen." Tom swallowed. "Aye." Victor gestured for him to sit. "Start from the beginning." Victor sat across from Tom in the cramped office, the tension between them thick. The dull hum of the store beyond the door felt distant, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Tom's fingers drummed against the desk, his gaze flickering between Victor and the door, as if considering an escape route. But there was none. Victor leaned forward, elbows on the desk. "Start talking." Tom exhaled sharply, rubbing his temple. "Look, I didn't know it had gotten this bad." His voice lacked conviction. "I mean, yeah, Dawson was rough around the edges, but I thought he was just doing his job." Victor's stare remained steady. "You thought shoving customers and intimidating employees was his job." Tom's mouth opened, then shut. A flush of color crept up his neck. "I'm not excusing it. He hesitated. I have been stretched thin. Corporate keeps pushing numbers, and I have been putting out fires left and right. Dawson handled security, and I trusted that he knew what he was doing." Victor let the silence stretch, watching Tom squirm. Excuses were easy, but he needed the truth. Tom sighed heavily, running a hand through his graying hair. The last regional manager was the one who approved Dawson's transfer here. He vouched for him, said he was effective. When I raised concerns, I was told to focus on sales and let security handle security. Victor tapped a finger on the desk, "And you went along with that." Tom's shoulders slumped. "I should have pushed back, but every time I tried, I was told the same thing: numbers first. The higher-ups don't want to hear about store culture, just bottom-line results. So, yeah, I let Dawson do his thing because it meant one less issue on my plate." Victor's jaw tightened, "And now employees are afraid to speak. Customers are walking out humiliated. That's the price of looking the other way." Tom swallowed hard. "I get it now. I do, but I didn't know how to fix it. When you're just trying to keep the store running, you stop questioning things that seem like they work, even when they shouldn't." Victor sat back, considering him. Tom wasn't malicious, just burned out, complacent. That was its own kind of failure, but it was fixable. "You're going to fix this," Victor said, "starting today." Tom nodded quickly. "Yes, absolutely." Victor folded his arms. "First, employees need a way to report issues without fear of retaliation. If they don't trust their managers, they won't speak up. We're implementing an anonymous reporting system across all stores." Tom straightened. That would help. A lot of people were too scared to say anything because Dawson had connections higher up. If they knew, they could report things safely. Victor didn't let him finish. "Second, we're changing how security is handled. No more unchecked authority. Guards report to the store manager directly. You will review every incident report personally." Tom nodded, his expression serious. "Third," Victor continued, "I'm bringing in a leadership coach. You and your management team will go through mandatory training on handling employee concerns and maintaining store culture. No more letting things slide because they are easier." Tom exhaled. "That's fair, yeah, I needed that push." Victor wasn't finished. "And lastly, you're going to have conversations, real ones, with your employees. You're going to ask them what they need, what's not working, and actually listen." Tom's face tightened, but he nodded. "Understood." Victor studied him for a moment before standing. "You're still here because I believe you can do better, but if I ever see this kind of neglect again, you won't be." Tom swallowed hard. "I won't let it happen again." Victor turned to leave, but before he reached the door, Tom spoke again. "That woman yesterday, the pregnant one, is she okay?" Victor paused, then nodded. She's fine, but she shouldn't have had to be. Tom looked away, guilt settling into his features. Victor stepped out of the office, his mind already moving to the next steps. Out on the floor, employees glanced at him, uncertain. He spotted Lewis near the back, still stocking shelves, moving cautiously. Victor approached. Lewis. Lewis turned sharply, nearly knocking over a box. Yes. Victor's tone softened. I saw what happened with Dawson yesterday. Lewis's face went pale. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't, Victor assured him, but that kind of treatment was unacceptable. Dawson is gone. Lewis blinked, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Really? Victor nodded. Really, and going forward, no one in the store should feel afraid to do their job. Lewis hesitated, then gave a small nod. That would be nice. Victor knew trust wouldn't be rebuilt in a day, but this was the first step. As he continued through the store, he caught sight of the cashier from yesterday, the one who had tried to help the elderly man. She was focused on a transaction, speaking kindly to a customer. Victor made a note to reward the employees who had shown integrity despite the toxic environment. People like her, like Lewis, were the kind of workers who made a business strong. It was time they were recognized. He stepped outside, taking a deep breath. The store would change, it had to, and he would make sure of it. Victor spent the next few days overseeing the changes firsthand. He wasn't going to implement policies from a distance and hope they worked. He needed to see for himself that the store was moving in the right direction. The first step was rebuilding trust with the employees. He scheduled one-on-one meetings with them, asking direct questions about their experiences. Some were hesitant at first, reluctant to speak openly after years of feeling unheard. But once they realized he was serious, the floodgates opened. Lewis admitted he had been considering quitting, not because he disliked the job, but because the environment had become unbearable. The cashier who had defended the elderly customer, whose name was Mia, shared how she had often stepped in to soften Dawson's harsh treatment of customers, but she had felt powerless to stop him completely. Other employees spoke about the pressure to stay silent, the feeling that management didn't care as long as the store numbers looked good. Victor listened carefully, taking notes, making sure each concern was addressed. He wasn't just looking for problems, he wanted solutions. After the meetings, he gathered the management team, including Tom, in the break room. The air was thick with tension, but Victor's tone was measured. We're not here to dwell on what went wrong, he said. We're here to make sure it doesn't happen again. The managers nodded, some more confidently than others. One thing is clear: employees didn't feel safe speaking up. That stops today. If anyone sees something wrong, they need to know they'll be heard. One of the assistant managers, a woman named Rachel, shifted in her seat. A lot of us knew Dawson was a problem, but we assumed corporate wouldn't back us if we tried to do something. Victor met her gaze. That's why I'm here. From now on, if a manager ignores a valid complaint, they'll answer to me. Tom nodded. We should have done more. We're ready to fix it. Victor wasn't interested in empty promises. Good, because this isn't a one-time fix. This is about changing how this store operates. The next step was restructuring the security team. Mark, the head of security, had already begun vetting replacements, ensuring that whoever took Dawson's place understood their role was to protect, not intimidate. Until then, a temporary hire was brought in, someone with a background in conflict resolution rather than brute force. Victor was still in the store when the new guard, a man named Eric, started his first shift. The contrast was immediate. Instead of standing with his arms crossed, glaring at customers, Eric moved through the aisles, offering assistance when needed. When an elderly woman appeared disoriented near the entrance, he approached with a calm demeanor, asking if she needed help. She smiled and nodded, relieved rather than afraid. Employees noticed the shift as well. The air of unease that had hung over the store for so long was beginning to lift. Victor made a point to observe customer interactions as well. He wanted to know if the changes were making a difference. One afternoon, he stood near the checkout lanes, watching as Mia helped a customer with a complicated return. She handled it with patience, explaining each step clearly. The customer left satisfied, thanking her for her kindness. Victor approached after the transaction was complete. "You handled that well," he said. Mia looked up surprised. "Oh, thank you. You've been one of the few employees consistently standing up for customers," Victor continued. "That's the kind of leadership we need in this company." Mia hesitated. I just didn't like seeing people treated unfairly. "That's exactly why we need people like you," Victor said. "I'd like to offer you a promotion, assistant manager." Mia's eyes widened. "Really?" "You've already been doing the work," Victor said. "It's time you had the title to match it." She blinked as if processing the weight of his words. Then, slowly, she smiled. "I'd love that." Victor nodded. "Good. We'll set up a meeting next week to go over the details." As the days passed, Victor saw more signs of change. Employees carried themselves differently, no longer glancing over their shoulders in fear. Customers lingered in the store longer, no longer rushing to leave. The shift was subtle but undeniable. On his final day on site, Victor stood near the entrance, watching as Louis restocked shelves with a renewed sense of purpose. Mia moved through the store, training a new hire. Tom was speaking with a group of employees, actively listening instead of just issuing directives. The store wasn't perfect yet, there was still work to do, but the foundation had been laid. The culture was shifting. Victor stepped outside, taking one last look before heading to his car. The store would never be the same again, and that was exactly the point. Victor didn't just leave the store behind, he made sure the reforms were taking root. Over the next several weeks, he kept a close eye on how things developed, calling in regularly to check on progress. But he knew distance wouldn't give him the full picture. He needed to return unannounced. It was late afternoon when he walked through the automatic doors again, this time without warning anyone. He moved past the aisles, watching how employees interacted, how customers were treated. The tension that had once choked the store was gone. There was movement, conversation. Employees weren't just working, they were engaging with one another, with customers. It was subtle, but unmistakable. He spotted Mia near the entrance, speaking with an elderly man while gesturing toward a shelf. When she noticed Victor, she gave a small nod but didn't rush over. She had work to do, and that was exactly what he wanted to see. He continued walking, passing by the registers where Louis was bagging groceries, chatting with a woman as he packed her items carefully. In the past, employees had been too cautious, too afraid to step outside their immediate tasks. Now, they were present, aware, more than just workers going through the motions. He moved toward the back where Tom was standing with another manager, their brows furrowed as they reviewed something on a clipboard. They didn't notice him right away, which meant he had a chance to observe. Tom's posture had changed. Before, he had carried the weight of exhaustion, a man worn down by routine. Now, he stood with purpose, actively listening as the other manager pointed to a section of shelves. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't just about numbers. There was engagement, a level of attentiveness that hadn't been there before. Victor approached, waiting for a break in their conversation before speaking. "Looks like things are running differently," he said. Tom turned, surprised but not panicked. That was a good sign. "They are," he admitted. "Took some adjustments, but the team is responding well. The reporting system has already been used a few times, and we've actually caught issues before they escalated." Victor nodded, approving. "That's what I wanted to hear." The other manager, a younger man with sharp features, glanced between them. It's been interesting seeing how people open up when they know they won't be ignored. Tom shifted slightly. Honestly, I should have done this a long time ago. Victor didn't dwell on past mistakes. What matters is that it's happening now. Tom exhaled through his nose, glancing toward the front of the store. Mia's been handling her new position well. Customers trust her, and the employees do too. Victor had already seen that himself. She was the right choice. The younger manager hesitated before speaking again. I think the biggest change has been knowing we're allowed to step in. Before, people assumed certain things weren't their place to question. Victor met his gaze. That's what leadership is, knowing when to step in, when to challenge things that don't sit right. Tom gave a slow nod. I won't let things slip again. I know how easy it is to overlook problems when you're focused on keeping things running, but that's no excuse. Victor studied him for a moment before responding. Then make sure you don't. Tom glanced back at the clipboard in his hand, gripping it a little tighter before nodding. Victor didn't linger. He had seen what he needed to see. As he moved through the aisles again, he caught snippets of conversations, employees discussing schedules, helping customers find items, managers checking in on their teams. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Near the checkout lanes, Lewis spotted him and gave a small wave before turning back to his work. Victor stepped outside, letting the cool air hit him. There were still other stores to check, other locations that might have been dealing with the same issues without his knowledge, but this was a start. A company's culture didn't change in a day. It wasn't about one firing, one policy update. It was about making sure the right people were in place, that the right values were upheld. And he would make sure of it.